Alright guys, so today Unit 6, Notes number 3, that's factoring by the X box method when A is equal to 1. So we need to know how to factor out the greatest common factor and also factor quadratic equations when A equals 1 with the box method. So first, before we can do any factoring, we need to know how to factor out the greatest common factor. So that's what we're going to do first. So right here, let's say they give you an equation like this. It says solve 4x cubed equals 8x squared. First of all, you want to determine what they want, what they're asking of you. So it says solve, right? Because it says solve, that doesn't mean just factor out and you're done. That means they want you to tell them what x equals. So your answer should be x equals something, okay? All right, but you have to factor it out to be able to find that. So first things first, you want to rearrange the equation so that it's equal to 0. You see, right now it says 4x cubed equals 8x squared, right? I don't want it to say equals 8x squared. I want it to say equals 0. So how can I rearrange those terms to make it say equals 0? What do I have to do to the equation? So we want one of the sides to say equals 0. So we could just subtract 8x squared from both sides. What the heck? So then your equation would be 4x cubed minus 8x squared equals 0. All we did was subtract the 8x squared from the right side so we can move it to the left, and then it says equals 0. You guys see that? That's the very first step. But also note, you want to make sure that your terms go from the highest degree, which means exponent, to the lowest. Okay? So you see right now I have the 4x cubed term before I have the negative 8x squared, right? Because this x to the third is higher than the x to the second, okay? So make sure you have it lined up from greatest to least. That's going to be very important when you actually try to factor these later on. Okay, so once you got that, that's step 1. Step 2 is you're going to find the greatest common factor. Okay, the greatest common factor, to find that, you're going to find the biggest number that goes into both of these terms, all of your terms. Bless you. And you're also going to find the highest exponent you could take out of all of your terms. So what is the biggest number you can take out of all of those terms? What's the biggest number that goes into them? Just 2? 4. Because 8 doesn't go into 4, does it? No. But 4 goes into 4 and 4 goes into 8 though, right? So 4. And what is the highest exponent I can take from both of those terms? Exponent. Does this one have 3 right here though? 2, right. You can't take more than something has, right? So it's just 4x squared then. That's going to be the greatest common factor because 4 goes into both of these terms and x squared goes into both of these terms. So that's your greatest common factor, 4x squared. So in your next step 3, you're going to factor out this greatest common factor out of your equation. So we take out 4x squared, and this is like dividing every single term by 4x squared. If I divide 4x cubed by 4x squared, what's left? Write that over here. 4x cubed divided by 4x squared. What would be left if I divide this? Just x, that's right, because the 4's are gone, and then when you're dividing, you just subtract the exponents, so 3 minus 2 is just 1, so it's just x. So x goes here. That's the first term. And for the next term, I would be doing negative 8x squared divided by 4x squared. What would that be? What would it be? 2x. Negative 8x squared over 4x squared. Okay, you see how there's x squared on top, x squared on bottom? Those are gone. So it would just be negative 2, that's right. So minus 2. If I have the x squared on top and the x squared on bottom, that will just cancel out, and I'm just left with negative 8 over 4, which is negative 2, so that's my second term now. And that equals 0. You can always check your work, guys, by just distributing like this, 4x squared times x, 4x squared times negative 2, and it should give you back your original equation. That's how you can check to make sure you did it right. Although not everybody likes to check their work. Step 4 then. Remember the original question said to solve, right? So we need to find x. We got to solve for x. So how do we do that? We set each factor. This outside, that's a factor. That's the greatest common factor. This inside the parentheses, each set of parentheses is a separate factor. So we set each one equal to 0. So we have 4x squared equals 0. And what would my other equation be? What's the other factor? X. What's the rest of it? X minus 2 equals 0. You see this 4x squared? Set it equal to 0. See the x minus 2? Set it equal to 0. Then you just solve for x, and then you'll get your answers. But let me tell you real quick, when you take out the greatest common factor like this, right, and it's just like, there's no plus or minus anything, right? It's just 4x squared. You see right there, the 4x squared equals 0? That's always going to end up as just x equals 0. So without even having to like do much, you just know that's going to be x equals 0. Because any number times another number, for it to equal 0, x has to be 0. All right, what about the second equation over here? X minus 2 equals 0. What would x be? It would be 2. Just add 2 to both sides. And x equals 2. It's like that. Okay, so up here, right, it says solve. So it's kind of obvious, right? Solve, you're solving for x. X equals what? But down here, there's 4 different ways that solutions are called. So we need to make sure we know them. Because when we see those words, if you see one of these 4 words, you're solving for x. Okay, one of these words is solutions, of course. Another one's going to be x-intercepts. Another one would be roots. And the last way you might see it is going to be zeros. So they could say like, you know, give the solutions, give the roots, find the zeros, whatever. All of that, it just means you're trying to find x. What does x equal? Okay, so let's do example 1. Look at the directions. It says find the roots of the following. What kind of answer should I have? X equals something. That's right. Good. Okay, so let's do number 1 together. We got 7x cubed minus 35x squared equals 0. Remember, the first step is you want to set it equal to 0. Is it already set equal to 0? Yeah. Okay, so we're done with that. Then remember, we want to make sure it's lined up from highest exponent to lowest exponent. Is it lined up like that? Yes. Yes, it is. So now we can go into the factoring out the GCF, the greatest common factor. So what is the biggest number that goes into both of those terms? 7. And then what's the highest exponent you said? X squared, right. 7x squared. If I factor 7x squared out of 7x cubed, what's left? X. And if I factor 7x squared out of negative 35x squared, what's left? Minus 5, that's right. Equals 0. And you can check yourself, because if you multiply the 7x squared back to each of those terms, it will give you the original. Okay, so how do I find my roots then? How do I find 7x squared equals 0? X minus 5 equals 0, right. Each factor, you set it equal to 0. So this one on the left, 7x squared equals 0. X, you already know x is going to equal what? 0. That's right, that's automatic. Okay, and then this one on the right, x minus 5 equals 0. X equals? 5. That's right. Good. All right, let's go down to number 3 actually, because number 2 is the exact same thing as number 1 really. Number 3. What do we need to do first on number 3? We need to make it equal to 0, so what do we do? Add 4. It's not 4. 4x. We add 4x to both sides, so what's my new equation? Negative 6x squared. Yes, plus 4x equals 0. You cannot combine x squared terms and x terms. Gotta keep them separate. Okay, and are they lined up from highest exponent to lowest exponent? Yes, they are, so we're done with that. Now we can take out the greatest common factor. But here's a catch. Look up here. Look at this note right here. your first term cannot be negative. You see right here how we have a negative 6x squared? Yeah. So when we take our factor out, we have to factor out that negative, okay? We don't want the first one to be negative. So what's the biggest number that goes in both of these? 2. But if I take out just the 2, I'm still going to have a negative in the front, right? Yeah. So instead of taking out positive 2, I'm going to take out negative 2, right? Now, what's the highest exponent that I can take out of each? X. Just the x, right? Okay?
Wait, I thought you said the negative still can't be in the front.
But this is not like on the inside of the parentheses, it's not going to be negative. Yeah. Because up here it's talking about after you take it out, right? Look, inside the parentheses it cannot be negative, that first one. Okay, so if you take out negative 2x out of negative 6x squared, what's left? 3x. Because look, negative 2x times 3x equals negative 6x squared. Okay, and what about this? If I factor negative 2x out of 4x, what is that? Negative 2. There's no x because, right? Yeah. 4x divided by negative 2x is just negative 2. That equals 0. And then how do I find my answers then? How do I find negative 2x equals 0 and 3x minus 2 equals 0. So this one on the left, negative 2x equals 0, we already know immediately x is going to equal 0, right? And how do I find x for the 3x minus 2? Add 2 to both sides, and that will give me? And then? And so x equals? 2/3. That's right. And that is factoring out the greatest common factor. All right, so let's go on to the back side now. This is going to be how you factor when a is 1. Okay, right now, this is the pretty shorter method. This only works when a is 1. Okay, so don't try it with other things. Okay, so when you're factoring, you're trying to take a quadratic equation. Quadratic equation is like ax squared plus bx plus c. And you want to break it down into 2 factors. So you're going to have 2 sets of parentheses. And in your parentheses, each one is going to be a factor. When a is 1, so notice how the notes say when a is 1, right? This only works when a is 1. But when a is 1, you know you're going to have x at the beginning of each parentheses. You just don't know what goes in the blank after the x. Right? This is factoring. A lot of us struggle with factoring. But when a is 1, you know it's going to start with x in each parentheses. You just don't know what goes in after. So let's take a look at an example and see how we can use the x box method. This method is actually pretty crazy. So whatever your equation on your paper says, I think is different. Change it to say 2x squared plus 2x equals 12. The equation on your paper, guys, it does not say this, but I need you to change it to 2x squared plus 2x equals 12. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay, so using this equation right here, we're going to see how we would factor this out. And then it says find the zeros. So my final answer should look like what? X equals something, that's right. Okay, so before we can even start factoring, we need to take care of those 2 steps that we did always. You want to rearrange the equation so that it's equal to 0. You see right now it says equals 12, right? Yes. So what can I do to make it say equals 0? Subtract 12, that's right. So if I subtract 12, then my new equation is going to be 2x squared plus 2x minus 12, right? Equals 0. And then remember, we have to make sure, and this is extremely important when we're factoring now, that your exponents are from highest to lowest. Is it in the order from highest to lowest? Yeah. Yes, it is. Good. So we're done with that step. Next step now, step 2, you have to factor out the greatest common factor. Remember, I told you, right now, this only works when a is 1, right? But look, what's a right now? 2. But if we factor out, then maybe we can get it to 1. So what's the biggest number? Let's ask Jaime. Jaime, What's the biggest number that goes into all of these terms? 2, that's right. So we take a 2 out. Okay, can I take any x's out of all of them? No, I can't. Why? Because see this 12, there's no x's. He doesn't have any x's to give. So I can't, so it's just going to be 2. That's it. It's just 2. So now, when I divide all of these terms by 2, what's left inside my parentheses then?
No, 1x squared.
Right, 1x squared, which is x squared, right? And then plus x minus 6.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. Good, equals 0. You said to take a 2 out, so we're dividing all of these by 2. Okay, so now to factor out, we're going to factor this part, okay? This is the quadratic equation. You see that, right? X squared plus x minus 6. We want to factor that out into 2 factors. So now we're going to use the X box method. So you might have learned some different ways. You know, a lot of people learn I method or box method. I don't know how to do those. So I use the X box method because this is, exact. It always works. But remember, today, this is the only when A is 1. So let's take a look. First, we want to identify A, B, and C. What is A? Remember, this only works when A is 1, right? So A can't be 2. Look inside the parentheses. What's A? 1. That's the whole point of taking the 2 out, so we can make A equal 1. All right? Because today we're focusing on when A is 1. What is B?
1.
And what is C?
Negative 6.
That's right. That's from this part right here, the x squared plus x minus 6. Okay, good. So now take A times C. What is A times C here? That goes in the top space, so put negative 6 up there. What was B? 1. B goes in the bottom space, so put it there. Okay, so now we want to find the 2 numbers that go in the side spaces. How you're going to find that is it's going to be the 2 factors of negative 6 that add up to positive 1. So what are the 2 numbers that multiply to give you negative 6 and add to give you positive 1? Negative 2 and 3, that's right. Because negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Yeah, the signs do matter. And then negative 2 plus 3 is positive 1. Okay? Now look at step 4. Remember, the factored form of our original equation is x and then a blank and then x and a blank, right? Exactly. Those side numbers, that's what goes in the blanks. X minus 2. And what's my next set of parentheses? X plus 3. That's it. So now my factored form of it's going to be x minus 2 times x plus 3. But what am I forgetting though? Because look at my original up here. I just factored out the x squared plus x minus 6. What am I forgetting? At the very front. The 2. We just factored out this part right here, right? The x squared plus x minus 6, right? What happened to the 2? So it can't disappear. So we got to just put it back there on the outside, right there. So just put the 2 back at the front, right there. Okay? Now remember, our original question was to solve for x. So every factor that you see with the x, you're going to set that equal to 0, right? Just like we did. So what are my 2 equations here? X minus 2 equals 0. And x plus 3 equals 0.
So here the 2 is here.
Right, because there's no x on here, right? So we don't need to do anything with that one. So
x equals 2 and then x equals negative 3?
X equals 2, right? And x equals negative 3. That's right. And that's how you would solve by factoring. And that's going to end these notes. The end. See you in the next one. Peace.